Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perfect RIA Podcast, What Works Wednesday edition. I'm your host, Matthew Jarvis, and with me today is Lisa Mayfield, who is the creator of Aging Wisdom and the former president of the Aging Life Care Association. And really excited, Lisa, to have you on the podcast today to talk about this topic of what do we do as advisors as our clients get older in life and they start needing care beyond what they can provide to themselves. So, Lisa, thank you so much for being on with us today.
Thank you, Matthew, for having me. I'm very excited. I actually listened to your recent podcast with Jeff talking about what comes after the CFP. And there was actually a lot you talked about in there that I thought fit with this topic, actually.
Well, talk to us a little bit. I think for advisors that have been, financial advisors that have been in the industry a long time, we've all had clients age. And I'm trying to think of politically correct terms for this, but it is what it is, right? We all get to this point in life where we may need care that we can't provide, and not everybody has a family member who is able to or even qualified to help people find care. And this is kind of where you step in, correct, Lisa?
Correct. So I think with your clients that are probably post-retirement or getting there, probably in their 70s or late 60s, that might be looking down the road to say, someday if I need help, what care is available? What should I be thinking about? Should I be moving into a retirement community? If so, when? How would I find one? Or maybe even I never want to move into a retirement community. Do I have to? Could we stay at home? Do we need to downsize? Or your clients that maybe have a health event earlier than they might have been expecting. Often it might be a stroke or diagnosed with a progressive illness such as Parkinson's, maybe having a significant fall. So there's a health change that's forcing them to think about getting help earlier than they might have thought about or hoped or planned.
Now, sometimes your work, Lisa, and correct me if I'm wrong, is after that life event has happened, right? That Parkinson's diagnosis, a stroke, a fall, a broken hip. But a lot of times, and this is what I was really fascinated with, you're helping people set up that plan ahead of time, almost like we would do financially, but like the literal care of if you needed someone to come and help you bathe, not to be too personal, like who would that be? How would you find that person?
Right, and we can help either in the midst of a crisis, which historically has been when people have reached out to us, but we love working with people who are actually not in crisis, not in the middle of a health event, but they are planning ahead. So I think for financial planners, when you were talking with Jeff about annual meetings with clients, reviewing estate planning documents, just checking in what might have changed, I think that's kind of a good time to think about this topic, particularly if you're reviewing with them their power of attorney documents, who they've named as power of attorney, maybe who they haven't named, and thinking about their advance directives, how much care they want at the end of life. If you're working with your client holistically and you're making sure they have those documents, reviewing with them, I think that's a great time to say, hey, have you thought about down the road if you needed help? What would that look like? Do you want to stay at home? Do you want to move? Have you even thought about that? And kind of strike up a conversation as part of that dialogue.
Yeah, I really like that idea. It seems like a good time. Lisa, are there any phrases or introductions that you found especially helpful? I'm just trying to picture if I'm sitting down with a client, we reviewed their power of attorneys, and then I'm always trying to think, like, what's the transition to say, hey, listen, like, if you couldn't go grocery, I'm trying to think of a way to ease into that doesn't seem as personal as, like, hey, if you couldn't make it to the bathroom by yourself, right. You're like, hey, if you couldn't drive to the grocery store, who would do that for you? Or what are ways that you kind of go down that path in the proactive planning?
Right, that's a great question. I think for me, I might think about, God forbid, something changed with your health that you didn't anticipate. Maybe one of you had a stroke or one of you have a health diagnosis like Parkinson's. I'm just curious if you've thought about what you might do then. Would you like to stay at home? Have you thought about moving? These are things we just like to get our clients thinking about before they happen so that we know how to assist you in that process.
I really like that one. I mean, we do a similar thing, Lisa, when it comes to estate documents, right? We always ask that clients give us a copy. So we say, hey, if something sudden happened, like a stroke or a car accident, and your kids couldn't remember where you put those, they could call our office and we can get that process started. Seems like this would be a similar one. If heaven forbid something happened rapidly, we want to make sure we at least have a default plan in place. And Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like most people's default plan is, well, if heaven forbid I get sick, my spouse, I guess, will find a nursing home or something, and they'll just find the closest one, which really is what no one wants, I don't think.
Right. I think when people aren't planning ahead, it often will even leave it to their children, their adult children, to figure out what to do. And often if that crisis happens, there's fewer choices. But many people could stay at home if there was a crisis, at least eventually. There can be care set up at home. There could be ways the house is modified. So people don't necessarily have to move, but definitely if they're not thinking ahead, those decisions are often made for them and fall to their children or their stressed out partner or spouse. So that's why we encourage people to think ahead about it and take charge. But as you know, even with clients hesitating to think ahead about finances, it's often clients are reluctant to think ahead. We're all trying to get them to be mindful about the future, but often those topics aren't, the top topics we all want to be thinking about. So getting them to think about that can be challenging.
Yeah, it for sure can be. Sometimes I always like to remind clients the adage or cliche that luck favors the prepared. So I always like to mention, I say, listen, if something happened to you, we're now out of options. Like if we wait too long to make decisions, all our decisions are taken away. If we wait until the Parkinson's is so bad that we fall down the stairs, now our decisions are limited. If we start early and say, hey, I've got these early onset symptoms, Lisa, to your point, can I modify my house? Can I start bringing in some care so that the care of the home isn't so burdensome? But yeah, those things you have to plan ahead.
Right. And I think, so people like us, we're called care managers or aging life care professionals. We're a profession that can help these kind of clients think ahead. So what we might do with them is have a consultation where we would talk about this. If that crisis happened, would you want to stay at home? Would you want to move? What would that look like? And there's people like me all over the country, so I know your listeners are in a broad area, and so I like to point out you can find people like me at aginglifecare.org is our professional association, and we have a directory where you can search for people in your area where they can really become kind of part of your team. I know financial advisors often partner with attorneys or partner with CPAs. I think we can be just one other partner in your client's kind of support system.
I really like that. So that was aginglifecare.org is where your directory is.
Yes.
And I know that you and I recently met. We were introduced by Dustin Frost at Attentis, who was on the podcast earlier. And one of the things that I was really passionate about having met you is getting you introduced to our clients that don't have trusted family members either at all or in the area, because those seem to be the clients that are understandably the most concerned of, boy, if I had a health issue come up, like literally who would find me, who would make sure that I was cared for, who would make sure I'm getting good quality of care. And those seem to be like the people to start with first. Everybody obviously needs it, but it seems like that would be an easier discussion than, no, my wife will take care of me, and then my 4 kids will take care of me, and then my neighbor Dave, like whatever imagination we have.
Right. That's a great example. So, right, the clients whose kids are anywhere in the world, I mean, these days families are so spread apart. We've worked with clients who had, one time I had a daughter who worked in Africa. I had another daughter who was in Nepal. So families spread all over. We can become the local eyes and ears. We can be keeping tabs on how their parent is doing. So wherever they are and whatever they're doing, they can worry less and maybe not fly back and forth as often if their parent is already needing help. And then for people without kids, and I don't have children, so I often think of this myself, is helping those people think about who would make those decisions for you and who can jump in. And professionals like us can do a lot of that, stepping in to oversee the care and how they're doing, or go to doctor's appointments or at the hospital. We don't actually provide the care, but we would help people find the care they need, and then we would help orchestrate it and oversee it.
That's an important distinction. So the aging life care professionals, as you mentioned, you're not the ones doing in-home health care. You're not the ones necessarily placing someone in a home if they need be, but you're helping kind of like a second set of eyes, almost like a financial advisor, I guess, in some ways, except on the medical side, saying, hey, are the things that are happening what this person indeed wants to? Can you give us some specific examples, perhaps, Lisa, of places where you help. You mentioned doctor's visits, which are, I think, daunting for those of us that are healthy, let alone if we had chronic end-of-life situations.
All right. And I guess what I would think of, we're very much like the financial advisors, sort of the big picture orchestrator. And then if your client needed more hands-on help, like bookkeeping, paying the bills, you might refer them to somebody that would do the bookkeeping or writing the checks. And that's similar to us. We would help them find the people that would come in and do the care, but we wouldn't do it ourselves, although we could find people to help with the caregiving. So one example, I mean, we have a client who is in a retirement community and daughter lives in California, and we will check in on the father. I think this client we see once a week to see how he's doing, check in with the facility to how with the nurse, how is his care going? Has there been any problems? And then when he has doctor's appointments, check in either with the neurologist or the cardiologist. We can take them to that appointment and we help know what questions to ask the doctor. Also, when the doctor makes recommendations of what to do next, we can help make sure their recommendations are implemented and followed through on. And often the medical system is imperfect, which we always say that's why we have a job, is because the medical system is so imperfect, meaning when clients have multiple doctors, they often aren't talking to each other or coordinating with each other, and that can be another role for somebody like us, is to make sure the doctors know what the other doctors are doing or prescribing or what other issues are coming up besides the one that they're seeing that particular doctor for.
That's really great, Lisa. I'm just kind of like making notes of all the places where this helps. Curious on a logistics standpoint, do you end up getting some sort of limited power of attorney to be able to access all this medical stuff, or do you have releases for everyone? I'm just sort of curious from a logistics standpoint how you handle that.
Yeah, that's a great point. We can have releases that we don't serve as powers of attorney or even have limited. We can have people sign releases of information to the medical system to allow us to check in on their behalf. And actually, we rarely run into problems with that, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I would imagine these providers are probably relieved to have somebody coordinated versus trying to relay it, as you mentioned the scenario, to an adult child in another state who's busy running their own lives.
Right, or that their patient actually got to the doctor versus missing time after time, and that there's somebody helping them follow through with what they're doing. We also work with family members who might be in town, but have their own careers, they're busy working, they have their children, and so they're kind of talk about that as the sandwich generation, where you have both, caring for a parent, caring for kids, trying to work, and completely overwhelmed. We can jump in and do very similar things so that the adult child doesn't have to miss work all the time to go to doctor's appointments, or somebody's in and out of the hospital.
That's a really good point that you bring up there, Lisa. This is one I'm just taking notes from my own practice as I'm meeting with clients, right? So when we have this idea, we walk through the scenario and they say, well, my adult son who lives down the street, he will take care of me, to kind of probe a little bit further and say, let's call him Dave. Dave, when will your son have time for that? Like, what, I would imagine his schedule is full. What activities do you expect him to give up to care for you? Now, I'd want to word that a little bit more gently. I don't want to feel like it's accusatory, but it's a fair question, right? If I think my adult child is going to care for me, where in their schedule are they going to find that time? And is that, in fact, a burden I want to impose on them?
Correct. And I would talk about that your son's going to be there to support you, and does he have, capacity to add another thing on his plate? And then that reminds me, you probably have younger clients as well. So
I was thinking the same thing,
about,
please. Yeah.
Clients who, nowadays are probably 40s, late 40s, early 50s are the age where parents are starting to need help. And they might mention when they're meeting with you, they're stressed out because their parent is sick or needing help, or oftentimes the children are considering financially supporting their parent. They're the generation that has earned their money, and their parent doesn't have a lot, so they're thinking about paying for the cost of their parents' care, so that's on their mind. And I think that's a great time to pull in somebody like us as helping them realize how much that care might cost over time, what they should be thinking about, are there resources for their parents financially.
Boy, that's a really good point. We every calendar quarter we do for clients what we call a value add, where we dive deeper in one area. And I'm thinking about like a whole value add around this, to your point, Lisa, both for our elderly clients who might be concerned about themselves, but for our not quite as elderly clients who are concerned about their adult parents. And you mentioned the cost aspect. And again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but by doing that preemptive planning, you can actually save quite a bit of money potentially, right? If we say, boy, we need to take time to add safety features into your house so that you're less likely to fall and break a hip and end up in a nursing home, those preventative steps can make a really big difference.
That's what we believe in. If a parent has limited resources, it's even more important to be planning so that you're setting up plans that are sustainable for the long haul. And also we'll work with families who might quickly move a parent into a retirement community without really knowing, is that the right type of community? Is that one that's the best fit for them? Will that community be there for the long haul? Can they afford that community for an extended period of time, and really help families be thoughtful about that. Sometimes people think they need to move when they can actually stay at home. So that's another thing we can help them sort out. What are the pros and cons? What's the cost differential? What are costs that I didn't even think I should be thinking about? And particularly in the Seattle area and anywhere in big cities, cost of care has really skyrocketed. It's pretty significant. People that work more in the rural areas, care is more affordable.
That's really interesting. Lisa, I know that so you were the president of the Aging Life Care Association, so you know providers all over the country. Can you give us any kind of general insights on how those arrangements typically work, either from a cost, not necessarily dollars, because that's going to vary region to region, but how do those engagements typically work?
Great question. And aging life care professionals or care managers bill for their time by the hour, so very much like an attorney or a CPA. Typically, like our services typically start with a consultation, so we'll meet with any combination of people, usually for an hour and a half to 2 hours, to really have all the kind of conversations we've talked about today. Most clients who seek our help only need short-term help. Just help us plan, help us think ahead. They go on their way, and if things change, they might come back. And then other clients might need us more deeply ongoing. But you don't have to sign up for life. You can just check in, once a year, just to feel like you have that foundational knowledge of the resources.
Do you typically, after those consultations, have sort of a written plan, or is it more just like a general brainstorming, here's what it would look like? And again, I know it's going to vary from professional to professional. I'm just sort of curious in general.
Yeah, that's another great question, and it will vary. For us, we will have that consultation and we'll follow up with usually the recommendations. Here's what we recommend, or here's the options that we talked about. And if people need specific referrals, like they wanted caregivers at home, we would refer them to several agencies and the people to ask for and talk to.
I love that. Boy, this is just such a critical resource. I'm so glad that Dustin introduced us. Lisa, any general thoughts for our audience, things that advisors should be thinking of when they're meeting with clients, I guess sort of regardless of their age, whether they're talking to the client about their own health or the client's parents' health, just other things that we should be keeping in mind?
I think just that overall thought. What was the quote you said about
luck favors the prepared? Yes.
That this is a perfect example of how if people are thinking ahead and planning, then they can sort of tuck it away, not worry about it, go about their lives, travel, do the things they enjoy, because they know they already checked the boxes for those topics that they might be trying to avoid thinking about. So I think coming at it from that preparation, or just knowing that when you do have clients that fall into a medical crisis, there are people that can support you as the advisor in supporting your clients, because often you're one of the first people they call when there's a significant event, because they have so much trust in you. Sure. You're like their go-to person.
Yeah, which is a great spot to be in, but also a burden. So I think, Lisa, this transitions nicely into action items. This podcast is all about taking action. It seems to me that one of the first action items any of our listeners can do is to go to theaginglifecare.org and find the professionals in your area and take some time, pay for an hour of their time, get a better understanding of what they do and how they could potentially help your clients. So, hopefully so you can provide proactive planning. But worst case scenario, if it's reactive, if you get that call, Lisa, as you mentioned, hey, listen, my husband just had a stroke and I'm not sure what to do. You've got a resource there. You're not now scrambling through the phone tree trying to find options.
Absolutely, and I'm happy if people reached out to me. I'm also happy to help connect them with my colleagues in other places. And if you reach out to build a relationship, they won't charge you for their time. So it's just a great way to have a mutually collaborative relationship with each other. And I think an action item is thinking about all the people on your client's team that you can pull in. And so I think pulling in an aging life care professional to be with you and the attorney and the CPA.
I love that. Another action item that comes to mind, this is one that I'm going to implement when we do our meetings this fall in October with clients. I'm not sure when this episode airs, but when we meet with clients in October, I'm really going to dive a lot deeper. So we've always had, from a financial standpoint, what's kind of our long-term care plan? How would we pay for care? How would we manage our finances? But I'm really going to dive deeper. We'll come up with a value add on this worksheet. All right, not dollars and cents, like day in and day out, who's going to check in on you? Who's going to make sure that your care provider is doing a good job? And really get names in those spots and have a realistic conversation. Hey, if I think my son, Dave, is going to take care of that, okay, is he really signed up for that? Is he qualified for that, et cetera?
I think that's a great action item. And clients usually are far more open to thinking and talking about these things than people realize. So I think just putting it out there, and I think they'll appreciate it. I
love it. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate your willingness to share, and thank you on behalf of your industry for having served as the president. That's sometimes a thankless role to be an industry association president. Any other parting thoughts, how people can find more out about you?
My company is Aging Wisdom, and we're at agingwisdom.com, and we're happy to help people in the King County area or connect you with people in other places.
I love it. I love it. Well, Lisa, again, thank you so much for your time today, and for all of our listeners, until next time, happy planning.
Thank you, Matthew.